You're joining the 159th episode of the People's Court. It's Saturday, May 17th, 2014. The conference finals are set, and we bring you our predictions and X factors, along with a discussion on race and coaching. Court is now in session.
And now, here are your hosts, Chris, Lamont, and Al.
Well, that was sloppy. We're off to a rousing start once again. If you'd like to contact the People's Court, please call us at 424-ADJOURNED. That's 424-235-7633. Or hit us up on Twitter at People's Court FM. You can always follow us on our blog as well, http://thepeoplescourt.fm. In case you happen to miss any episodes, you can subscribe to our podcast there. Or, we're on YouTube too. The People's Court. What's up, Lamont?
Longing for 75-degree days. That's what's up.
Yo, it's been hot.
Yeah, it's been incredibly hot.
That's all right. The heat is okay.
I guess the heat is okay.
Speaking about the heat, let's jump right into this, Lamont, because the conference finals are set, and we have some familiar matchups in the conference finals. First of all, in the East, it's a rematch of last year's conference finals, and the matchup that everybody pretty much expected since the beginning of the season. Pacers Heat. Why don't you set the table here for this matchup?
Well, like you said, the matchup that everybody predicted at the start of the season, and despite all the whatever you want to call is going on with the Pacers, they're back in the conference finals with home court advantage, which is what they wanted, which is what they set out when they started the season.
Yeah, it was really touch and go there, wasn't it, for a little while? Like, nobody was sure if the Pacers would even get back to the conference finals to get that desired matchup with the Heat. Yeah, after they, going down, were they down 3-2 against the Hawks in the first round, getting blown out in game 1 of the second round. It didn't look good for the Pacers there.
It did not, and it's a question of it's become a question which is kind of strange but kind of not, of which Pacers team is going to show up. Is it the team from game 1 against the Wizards, or is it the team from game 4 or game 5?
Game 3 where they held the Wizards to 62 points.
Yeah, that
game.
Yeah,
that was game 3.
That game. So now that's going to become that's the question with each Pacers game for the last 2 months, pretty much.
Yeah, just in the Wizards series alone, you saw them get blown out in game 1, and then they won 3 consecutive games, and then they got blown out in game 5, only to finish things off in game 6. So it's the inconsistency there. It didn't hurt them against inferior teams like the Hawks and the Wizards, but it's going to hurt them a lot against the Heat. If they can't find a way to bring it every night, and you keep hearing guys like Paul George and David West, their motto throughout the playoffs has been, we just got to make sure we bring it every night. We can't take things for granted. If you're saying those kinds of things in the playoffs, how is that going to help you against the defending champion? It's not. It's just going to hurt you. If you can't bring it consistently, if you take things for granted, the Heat are going to take them apart.
Yeah, much like they've done to both Charlotte and Brooklyn. Like, the Heat have coasted.
Yeah, they haven't been challenged at all.
They had one little blip on the game. Was a game 3 in Brooklyn, but other than that, it's been a cakewalk for them. And
So, who's going to win this series, and who's going to be the X factor for this series, Lamont?
I think, I predicted that before the season started that Indiana would beat Miami in the conference final. But I'm going to have to change that because there's nothing that I've seen from Indiana over the last month, 2 months, 3 months that says that they can beat Miami in a 7-game series. Um, but I'm predicting that Miami will win in 6 games. So all that talk about Game 7 and everything won't even matter. Um,
Right.
but I think the X factor is the Pacers' consistency. They're a team that's built to take advantage of Miami's weaknesses, and if they can consistently do that, then they'll have a better chance. But I think Miami is just too good. Like they're
Yeah.
that everyone we talked about how no team has made it to 4 straight NBA finals since the Celtics did it in the '80s. We talked about the mental factor, the mental fatigue, the physical fatigue, and everything. But still, it really hasn't been much of an issue this playoffs yet, and I don't see it popping up now for them.
Yeah, and we said they haven't been challenged yet, and the team that was going to challenge them would be these Pacers, but we haven't had any indication, like I said, in the past 2 months, that they can actually dethrone the Heat. And I agree with you. I think the Heat are going to win this series. I'm avoiding predicting a number of games because it's hard to say. I mean, the Heat could win this thing in 4, 5, or 6. I don't think it'll go 7. I agree with you there. This thing is not going to go 7 games. And the X factor, to me, is going to be Chris Bosh. Because we saw the trouble in round 1 that stretch bigs give the Pacers. Between Pero Antic and Paul Millsap and Mike Scott, the Pacers were completely befuddled about how to guard guys that can shoot with their big guys, with Roy Hibbert and David West. Chris Bosh has been fantastic from beyond the arc in these playoffs. I think he's shooting something ridiculous, like 48% from the 3-point line in the playoffs so far. If he stretches that team out, it's going to completely nullify any inside advantage that the Pacers had, much like the way the Hawks nullified the inside advantage and took the Pacers to 7 games. So between guys like Bosh, Rashard Lewis, I think could factor importantly also in this series. And, of course, LeBron James when he plays the 4, Chris Battier when he plays the 4. I mean, they can surround the floor with shooters at their big positions. So what are the Pacers going to do? They showed that they have no answer in the first round of the playoffs. So he's my X factor, Chris Bosh, the Raptor himself.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see how the Pacers mentality, if they can bring it every night, or every game rather. I do think they have some amount of confidence knowing that they pushed Miami to 7 games a season ago. I think they split the season series this year. They do match up, like there are some favorable matchups. Hopefully Roy Hibbert is playing with a little bit more confidence.
As the Heat showed in round 2 versus Brooklyn, regular season doesn't really matter because the Heat clearly had a different agenda during the regular season. They're playing on another level right now in the postseason. So all of that stuff, what happened last year in the playoffs, what happened during the regular season, none of that matters. I think what matters most importantly is how these teams are playing now. And the Heat are the better team right now.
Definitely agree with that. Definitely.
Let's move on to the Western Conference. We have a matchup here, not a rematch of last year's conference final, but the previous year's conference final between the Spurs and the Thunder. I want you to set the table for what to expect in this series, Lamont.
Well, the big news is Serge Ibaka is out with a left calf injury. He got tangled up with Chris Paul Thursday night, left that game, and isn't due back until November. and that's a big deal for the Thunder. Somebody earlier tweeted out the difference that Serge Ibaka makes defensively against San Antonio. Tweeted out a few stats. Like at the rim, when Serge Ibaka is not on the is on the court, the Spurs shoot 48%. When he's off the court, it's something like 65% or whatever. And then, of course, the defensive efficiency when he's off the court, Spurs are like have a defensive rating of or offensive rating of 120, and then I think the number is around 100 when Serge Ibaka is off the court. Serge Ibaka gives the Spurs a lot of problems, and him being out is huge. And for the Spurs, I think I told you this mentioned this either on the air or to you off the air. But basically, I think Dallas woke up a sleeping monster in San Antonio by pushing them to 7 games in the first round. Since then,
yeah, we talked about it in our round 2 preview.
Yeah, they woke up. Tony Parker has strained his hamstring in Game 5 of their series, but that was Wednesday. So I haven't heard anything. I haven't seen anything saying otherwise. So I'm gonna assume he's going to be fine for this series, which means he's of course the engine that makes the Spurs go, and that's what we have to look forward to.
So the big question is, how do the Thunder make up for Ibaka's absence? Do they go small and play Kevin Durant at the 4?
I think they'll have to mix it up. I think they'll have to play Kevin Durant at the four sometimes, and I do think that a lot like what we saw Thursday night, huge nights for Nick Collison and Steven Adams, and those two guys are my X factor for this series. If those two guys can be as impactful as they were in Game 6 against the Clippers, then that improves Oklahoma's chances of beating the Spurs. And of course,
they're definitely going to need to get. They're going to have to find some sort of production without Ibaka, but since he's not their primary offensive player, then guys like Durant and Westbrook can help make up on the offensive side for Ibaka. And again, like I said, Collison, that guy is just the ultimate professional, and he's always prepared. So he's going to be able to fill in there. The big key, like you just talked about, is going to be how they do without him defensively. And clearly, he's their best defensive player, their best rim protector, and he's the guy who's going to match up with Tim Duncan. Now that they don't have that player, can Adams and Collison match up with Duncan? If they go small and play Durant, how will that factor in to his matchup with Duncan? I'm talking myself into Duncan being the X factor in this series, even though I had picked somebody else, but that's going to be key. How they manage without Ibaka defensively.
Yeah, I think they can match up. Like the difference, the reason why Serge Ibaka is long and intriguing athletic, and those two things give San Antonio problems. And the Thunder's perimeter length and athleticism has also historically given the Spurs problems. Like the passes, like the Thunder, for whatever reason, are always able to help and recover and not give up the wide open corner three to the Spurs. Their hands interfere with passing lanes. I do think that Adams and Collison aren't at an extreme disadvantage matchup wise with Tim Duncan. Like Duncan's game was never about athleticism. Anyways, it was always about being fundamental. They call him the big fundamental.
Fundamental.
They call him the big
exactly.
fundamental. I do think so they've got the strength and the quickness to defend Duncan, at least on paper, even though you would prefer Ibaka there, obviously. Um, you saw in the second round Kevin Durant guard Blake Griffin at times to I don't know if it was necessary. I don't think it proved to be a good matchup
Right.
because Blake is Blake.
Okay, so
But
here's an interesting question for you. If Parker's not 100%, whose absence will be felt more by their respective teams, Ibaka's or Parker's?
Ibaka's.
You think so?
I think so. I think this is where the Spurs depth comes in. And that's really how they beat Portland. Like Portland didn't have, Portland's bench was abysmal.
Yeah,
Spurs,
Portland goes 6 deep, and then Mo Williams got hurt, so they had to start bringing guys that were pretty much unproven, like Will Barton, C.J.
right,
McCollum, those guys.
right. So versus the Spurs who have gone like 10 or even 11 deep throughout the various points in the season. You've seen like Patty Mills play a big role. You saw in Game 5, you saw Kawhi Leonard step up after once Tony Parker was out. And I don't think like they're really. I haven't been able to find any words. So I don't. So Tony Parker is going to play. It's just a matter of how healthy he will be.
Right, how healthy, how effective he can be, but if it's the hamstring, that completely limits your effectiveness, especially, talking about a guy whose speed is one of his biggest advantages, and the fact that he's got to have to contend with Russell Westbrook. So if he's got a bad wheel, that's going to completely limit his effectiveness in this series.
And
So
I mean that Westbrook matchup is going to be problems for Oklahoma City regardless of Tony Parker's health. Um,
yeah, Westbrook's a matchup problem for pretty much everybody in the league.
so
So
here's
who's winning the
here's
series, Mont?
real quick. Here's the latest. Here's the latest on.
Oh, this is a breaking news.
Yeah, this
I don't have a sound bite or anything like that or a little quick visual breaking news. But go ahead.
Anyways, the latest is that was diagnosed with a grade 1 hamstring, which is the least severe of the industry. Of the least severe, so the least severe of that particular injury. And he's listed as day to day. But he did tell the San Antonio Express News that it's okay, not as bad as last season's NBA Finals, which was diagnosed as grade 2, and that was obviously a huge factor because I think after Game 1 he was extremely limited in last year's Finals, and he says he should be fine for Monday.
Okay. There it is. Breaking news. So who won the series, Lamont?
San Antonio wins the series, and I think it goes 6 games. I think San Antonio wins the series in 6.
Yeah. Once again, I refuse to pick the number of games that the series will go. It's just so hard to tell. But even with Ibaka, I think the Spurs could have won this series. But without Ibaka, the Spurs definitely win this series. And my X factor, you mentioned that Adams and Collison in lieu of Ibaka are your X factor for the series, but mine is Kawhi Leonard. I mean, you talked about him a little there. He's arguably the best two-way player in this series, and he's going to be matched up with Kevin Durant. So his ability to slow down Durant, but also go at Durant on the other side of the court, is going to help swing this series the Spurs' way.
Yeah,
So it looks like we're going to have a rematch of last year's finals, Heat and Spurs, if we're right.
If we're right. How often have we been right this playoffs?
Well, more than 50% of the time, I'll say that.
Let's see. Got the Houston-Portland first-round matchup completely wrong.
I got it right. Hey, I was right about Portland going there. I was right. Only the big one that I got wrong was Golden State. I didn't think they would take Clippers to 6 to 7 games, but they did.
Okay.
Clippers still won. And the other big one that I got wrong was the fact that the Clippers didn't make it to the conference finals. I actually had the Clippers going all the way to the finals. And here they are exiting after 2 rounds. Let's talk about that real quick, Lamont. Because I find myself, even though I'm not a Clipper fan, extremely disappointed by the season they just had. Because I feel like they have a roster that should have gotten them to the NBA Finals. Did I just overestimate how good they are? Or did they really disappoint? I mean, Doc Rivers, I thought he was going to take him over the edge. He was the one that guided the finals. They didn't make it there.
They had a few weaknesses in their roster at the small forward position and a backup big for DeAndre Jordan, and that they never truly addressed.
Right, so that small forward
like this,
wasn't supposed to be a weakness. When they picked up Jared Dudley, I felt that was a really good pickup. Dudley just never...
He sucked.
Yeah.
He sucked.
And they went and got Danny Granger.
He was more... Yeah, Jared Dudley was more bad than good for the Clippers throughout most of the season. Danny Granger had a few moments, but even still, the Clippers' 2 or 3 best lineups are the lineups that they would use most often. Didn't include him. I think he had one or 2 decent quarters this playoffs, but for the most part,
yeah, it's really tough when you get picked up mid-season to fit in with a team like that. But I mean, I kind of asked Clipper fans whether or not they were disappointed, and it was kind of mixed results. You know, some Clipper fans felt that they still, you know, in spite of the scandal surrounding the team, they still performed pretty well, at least getting to the second round. They felt that they should be proud of the season that they just had, setting another team record for wins in a season, winning the Pacific Division, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then there are other Clipper fans who felt disappointed, like, hey, we expected more this season, and they didn't get it. It's one of those things where they're taking steps backwards each season. Even though they improve upon their regular season, their production in the playoffs just seems to take a step backward each season. Like, they made it to the second round their first year with Chris Paul, then they got ousted last year in the first round. And then this year, to get ousted in the second round again, but having to go 7 games in the first round and then only making it to Game 6 of the second round. I don't know. I feel like they should have done better. Especially Ibaka gets hurt in the fourth quarter of a game when they had control of the game. Game 6, they couldn't hold on to it. Game 5, they couldn't hold on to that one. Like, they just let opportunities slip through their hands. They should be playing the Spurs in the conference finals.
Yeah, they definitely had chances to take care of business against the Thunder. I mean, Game 5, Durant was awful for
about 45 minutes.
Yeah, and it took a spectacular performance from Russell Westbrook to keep the Thunder close. There was the controversial officiating in Game 5. The last 90 seconds were extremely bad the last 3 minutes were really bad for the Clippers, and the last 90 seconds were particularly bad for Chris Paul. Again, in Game 6, they had a double-digit lead and didn't take care of didn't take care of it. So they had their opportunity. So
at home, no less.
Right. So in that regard, being as how they had opportunities to get it done and didn't, the season is a disappointment. is a disappointment. If you were to when the playoffs started, there were four teams that you could have said made it to the NBA final, could get to the NBA finals. Those four teams being Miami, San Antonio, Oklahoma City, and the Clippers. So for any of those four teams to not get that far, it would, the season would be called a disappointment. So I'm going to go ahead and say that, going out in the second round, um, is a disappointment, considering that, at the start of this in October, when the training camp started, the roster was probably the best that they've ever had. Um, on the other hand, they lost to one of those four teams that you could have said would make it to the finals. So you could say that they made it to the second round and got beat by a really good team, and they're still poised to be in the discussion when next season starts.
Yeah, I mean, going forward, their position is still good. But let's talk. I mean, you mentioned Chris Paul in the horrific 90 seconds that he had in Game 5. Let's transition here into talking about Chris Paul, because I think we both agree that the Clippers had a disappointing season. And I think most of all, the person who should be most disappointed is Chris Paul himself. And let's real quickly, I do want to get into this race and coaching discussion, but Chris Paul is a guy who's easily considered the best point guard in the league right now, and arguably the best point guard of his generation. I don't even know who else would be in that discussion.
Well, yeah, the guy that was in that discussion is, yeah, the best point guard of his, definitely the best point guard of his generation.
Of his generation, right? So it's very rare that the best player at his position of his generation doesn't have more to say about who wins and loses championships. Chris Paul's been in the league for 9 seasons now, but he has never been to conference finals. So he hasn't really had anything to say about who's been winning and losing championships, despite the fact that he's the best point guard of his generation. Yet people still revere him as the best point guard of his generation, despite the fact that he hasn't won anything. And in a league where we always measure success based on rings, here's a guy who's never even sniffed a ring. I think it's time that we start criticizing Chris Paul for not being able to win.
It's about to be his turn, right? So, in his defense about lack of playoff success, was there when he was in New Orleans, was there ever a series where, before the series started, you thought that a Chris Paul led New Orleans Hornets team was the best team in that series? Not really.
Yeah, the year that they and the Lakers tied for the best record in the West. I think that was 2008 when the Lakers lost to the Celtics in the finals.
Right. That season.
That season, they had a really good team.
Right.
And could have easily advanced, not easily, but could have definitely advanced to the finals.
They also lost to the Lakers in the second round with a team led by Kobe Bryant when he was probably still the best player on the planet.
Right. So that was Chris Paul before he hit his prime. He was still really young at that point, and versus Kobe Bryant in his prime.
So you would consider that season being a success. I think the following season he was hurt, missed a lot of the season. I don't remember what the Hornets did in the playoffs, if they even got that far that season. So I think in his lack of playoff success, you can always say that, well, with the exception of that one season, did he definitely, for the most of his career, did he definitely have a better team since he's been with the Clippers? Who did they played? Who, who did they play the first year, the first round?
Oh, we're gonna have to mute you, Lamont, because
We're
you
gonna
got
have
the
to, we're
phone
gonna
thing
we're
going
gonna
on over there.
we're gonna have to.
So while Lamont waits for the phone to stop ringing, he was trying to say that the Clippers, that Chris Paul hasn't been favored really since he's been with the Clippers, and I would say that he has, especially this season. Like I said, the expectation that I have for that team was to make it to the finals and potentially even win the championship this year. When you look at other guys like Carmelo Anthony, guys like Dwight Howard, or even going further into the past like Patrick Ewing, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, these guys, you hear it all the time how these guys haven't been able to win a championship. And the fact that Chris Paul hasn't even advanced to the finals, even advanced to the conference finals, to me is just, we need to start reevaluating how good we think Chris Paul is.
I think he's still point guard. He's still the best point. He's still the best at his position. He's still a top 5 player. The things that I feel that Chris Paul has largely gotten a pass on don't involve playoff success. Like he's done a lot of the things. He's done a lot of the same things that say Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, LeBron James, and Kobe Bryant have gotten crucified for. Kobe Bryant isn't necessarily the easiest is admittedly not the easy hasn't been the easiest teammate to play with, and sometimes Chris Paul is kind of in that same lot, but nobody mentions that he could be. It rarely gets mentioned that he could be a difficult person to play with. Um, Dwight Howard Dwight Howard, among the many things he did in Orlando, pretty much got Van Gundy fired, or bad relationship with that, but and got nailed for it. A year ago at this time, if Chris Paul didn't necessarily say he wanted a different coach, but besides Del Negro, but he didn't say, "Yo, that's my coach." He also didn't say that that's my coach, and of course, everybody, of course, Del Negro doesn't necessarily isn't coaching royalty. So when he gets when his contract is not renewed, everybody says, yeah, that's a good decision. Um, Carmelo Anthony, Darren Williams, all wanted trades from their perspective, from Denver and Utah respectively. They got crucified for it. Chris Paul, coming out of the lockout, pretty much said he didn't want to be in New Orleans anymore, but they were a bad team at the time, so nobody really had anything to say about that. Um, I think it's going to be his turn pretty soon. He just turned.
It needs to be his turn now. Like, why pretty soon? Now is the time for it to be his turn. Because especially with Carmelo Anthony being the agent right now, and the question arising, can Carmelo Anthony be the centerpiece of a championship team? Or does he need to just find other guys to play with? Right? That's the question right now. If he resigns with the Knicks, he's the centerpiece, and they try to build a championship team around him, or he can go to a team like the Bulls that already have a lot of pieces in place, right? The same question needs to be asked right now of Chris Paul. Can Chris Paul be the centerpiece of a championship team? Right now, for me, the answer is no. And he's not young anymore. He's in the prime of his career. He's 29 years old. He's been in the league for 9 seasons. He's in that. That's when guys realize their potential, right? His age, starting about age 27, on to about age 30 or 31. So he's right in the middle of his prime. And had really the best team he's ever been on this past season. They went and got Doc Rivers, like you said, even though he didn't ask for Del Negro to be let go. He never supported Del Negro, and obviously Del Negro was not the coach that was going to get them there either. So they got Doc Rivers. Blake Griffin is young in there. They got DeAndre Jordan. They went out and got J.J. Redick, and this was it. This was a golden opportunity. Yet with him at the helm, Clippers didn't get there. So the question is now, what can the Clippers do to make this a championship team? You know, maybe bringing somebody in that allows Chris Paul to play second fiddle. Somebody that would put him more of a Tony Parker type of role, who's been extremely successful over there in San Antonio because he's not the person they built the team around initially anyway. Although right now you can argue that he is. Maybe Tony Parker's the best point guard of his generation.
Yeah.
How many? He's only got 3 titles of Finals MVP. That team is consistently in the conference championships. This is the 3rd consecutive season. They've been to 4 NBA Finals. I mean, maybe that's the guy. Maybe that's the guy. He came into the league 2 years before Chris Paul. Maybe 3 years before Chris Paul. But they're about the same age, right? Tony Parker's like 31.
Tony Parker's 31. Chris Paul just turned 29, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've Charles Barkley's been saying it. Maybe Tony Parker is the best point guard of his generation. Not Chris Paul, despite the point guard moniker.
I think you just made a bold statement that I'm not sure if I entirely agree with, but it sounds like you're lobbying for Clippers to bring in. Shit, I don't know who you're lobbying for. Sounds like you're lobbying for. I don't know. I don't know who you're lobbying. I don't know who the player is who's out there that you're lobbying for. It sounds like either you're lobbying for Blake Griffin to get into a fist fight with Chris Paul during the summer, and then the winner of that is for Blake Griffin to win that fight and say, "This is my team." That's what it sounds like you're lobbying for.
Yeah, I mean, basically,
like what, in a similar fashion to what happened in Miami, where that first season nobody was sure if it was LeBron James' team or Dwayne Wade's team, and then after they lose to Dallas in the finals, and it's clear that it's not in either his best interest or the team's best interest, where Dwayne Wade said, "Okay, LeBron, this is your team. We do everything. You're the undisputed leader." You're
absolutely right. I'm really calling into question Chris Paul's leadership ability. And he's one of those guys whose leadership has never been questioned. Someone like Kobe Bryant, that guy, he wants to win at all costs. That's who he actually gets compared to a lot. And this is a guy who supposed to be able to put a team on his back. But really, when you think about it, other than during the regular season, he hasn't been able to put a team on his back. So is Blake Griffin the type of leader that can lead the team to their ultimate goal? I don't know if he's that type of leader either. People always wonder whether LeBron was that type of leader, and it took for him to get to Miami before he really became that type of leader. Dwayne Wade was certainly that kind of leader, although that first championship he had with Shaquille O'Neal, it's tough to say who really was the leader of that team. Wade was obviously the best player on that team, but I don't know who the leader of that team. The leader of that team is probably Pat Riley.
Yeah.
So that's really the question now, right? I mean, can he lead a team to that ultimate glory? And right now I'm leaning towards no, because he just hasn't given us any evidence that he can. I mean, like I mentioned the previous guys, Patrick Ewing, he wasn't that kind of leader either, but at least he made 2 NBA Finals. Well, let's say 1. The second one he was pretty much hurt for. Karl Malone, John Stockton, those guys made it to 2 NBA finals, and they were always in the conference finals too. Charles Barkley, same thing, made it to an NBA finals, had multiple appearances in the conference finals. Even going as far back as Elgin Baylor, guys who've fallen short in their careers at winning a title, yet they were still present on the landscape of who's going to win, right? But Chris Paul hasn't been there. Even Carmelo Anthony's made a conference finals. Just one, but he's been there.
Right.
Chris Paul, you can say, oh, he's played in the toughest conference, and yeah, he's been in the Western Conference his entire career. But Dirk Nowitzki's been in conference finals. Steve Nash, couple of conference finals, even though they always fell short. Chris Paul, he's nowhere to speak of on this. So he's not that guy to me anymore. I think we've talked a lot about this, Lamont. What do you think?
I think we've talked a lot about this too.
Yeah, so two things. Chris Paul, maybe not the leader everybody thinks he is. And two, maybe not the best point guard of his generation like everybody thinks he is. Hello, Tony Parker. All right.
Hello,
So
Tony Parker.
the topic that I've really been waiting to talk about this whole time, Lamont, and we've kind of squeezed it now into a small section of the show, but I think we're going to go into overtime in order to make room for this topic.
Free basketball, yay.
Yeah. I'll just ask this question that Scott Ostler asked of the San Francisco Gate. In the midst of the topic of race that Donald Sterling has so nicely thrusted upon us the past few weeks, Scott Ostler asks, is there a different standard for black coaches in the NBA? And I'll just let that question sit before we go into some more details and ask if you think, Lamont, that there's a different standard for black coaches in the NBA.
It seems like there might be. It seems like there might be. And I don't think it's a conscious thing, but it's there. So the two examples that I would like to go to is Lionel Hollins in Memphis and George Karl in Denver.
Okay.
Lionel Hollins, they set a franchise record in wins last season.
Record for wins, yeah.
Last season, made it to the conference finals. Made it to the conference finals. And Memphis has new ownership, and he's not about the analytics and whatever, so they let him go. George Karl was coach of the year last year. Was he coach of the year last year?
Coach of the year.
Was coach of the year. They don't get to the conference finals. I think Denver won 57 games last season.
Yeah, I think they were the second overall seed, lost the Warriors in the first round.
Right. And then he gets fired. The difference is George Karl was in Denver for like 9 seasons. Versus so he had a lot of rope, right? Versus say Lionel Hollins, who was only there for 5 seasons maybe, I think.
You say only, that's still a long time.
It's a long time now. Or of course the big one, Mark Jackson was only in Golden State for 3 seasons.
Right. And I think that's the situation that really triggered this discussion. Mark Jackson gets fired after 3 seasons, after having a pretty successful season, much like Hollins and Karl, like you mentioned already. But then he gets replaced by Steve Kerr, who has no coaching experience whatsoever, yet received a really large contract for a guy who has no coaching experience. The contract that Mark Jackson got from the Warriors, 3 years, $6 million. Steve Kerr got 5 years and $25 million. He's the third highest paid coach or fourth highest paid coach in the league right now. And that's crazy for a first time head coach. And so the underlying question there is, did race have an impact in the firing of Mark Jackson, the hiring of Steve Kerr, and the subsequent contract that Kerr received? I don't know if I would go that far. I don't know the LeCobes well enough. The fact that Steve Kerr got 5 years, $25 million, to me, says more about the power of Phil Jackson's endorsement. Well, maybe not even Phil Jackson's endorsement, but the power of Phil Jackson's wanting Steve Kerr, right? So if the Warriors wanted to hire Kerr, they're going to have to make a better offer than the Knicks could offer him, and that offer was 5 years, $25 million. Like I think there was definitely a negotiation there, and that's why the number shot up so much.
Yeah, and also like two other things. First, Steve Kerr wasn't Golden State's first choice. That was Stan Van Gundy. Stan Van Gundy was in the Stan Van Gundy was in the, they interviewed Stan Van Gundy before even talking about Steve Kerr, because everybody thought that Steve Kerr was going to go coach the Knicks.
Right, and Van Gundy ends up getting a really large deal too. We got $35 million
and full control
right, from the Pistons.
Which is why he's in Detroit, because of that full control part. Golden State didn't want to do that. And also the Warriors, we should mention that the Warriors also employ an openly gay general manager or somebody, I forget who it is, in their
Rick Weiss is his name.
Yeah,
Rich Weiss, something like that.
In their front office. And there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things behind that Mark Jackson firing. There's a ton of it was more of a just a personality clash than I think than a race issue. But I think it is worth talking about. Could a guy like Mark Jackson, Jason Kidd, two guys that had no coaching experience, got basically $2 million per year from their respective hirings. There wasn't necessarily a market for Mark Jackson, because I don't remember anybody else wanting him as their coach besides Golden State. And then with Jason Kidd, it happened so quickly that there wasn't any time. It basically came out of nowhere. There wasn't even time to be say, hey, I want to coach. I want to coach with Jason Kidd. So I think the market does play into the size of the contract that Steve Kerr got. But what if someone like, I guess a hot name, the only hot name that I can think of right now is, what if like Kevin Ollie wanted to coach in the NBA? Like, he's a hot name because he just won a champ. He did a good job with UConn. He has no coaching experience at the NBA level. But would he be able to get the size of a similar contract to what Steve Kerr got if he wanted to come coach in the NBA? I don't know that he does.
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, to speculate on that. But just to go back to the original question, is there a different standard for black coaches? And my initial response was, no, I don't think so, because you pointed out the great example of Lionel Hollins getting fired after a successful season, but George Karl and Vinny Del Negro also both got fired after successful seasons. So that thought to me, well, no, they're both. All coaches are getting evaluated on essentially the same thing. Number one, can you succeed? Or number two, can you follow the culture that management puts in place? Right? And if you're able to do those two things, then you'll last long. If you can't, then you're gone pretty quick. And that's all coaches, not just black coaches, not just white coaches. But the more that I think about it, there is, I believe, a different standard to hiring coaches, white coaches versus black coaches. Maybe not evaluating them, but hiring them to begin with, right? Determining whether or not they should be fired or not is one thing, but determining whether or not they should be hired in the first place, yeah, most definitely. The evidence kind of speaks a lot to it when you look at the fact that Mike Brown just got fired and Mike Woodson also got fired. With those two guys being fired, that leaves only Tyrone Corbin
in Utah also got fired
in Utah, right? So with those guys getting fired right now, and those positions are still empty. But with those guys being fired, there's only 5 remaining black coaches in the league. Those are Jason Kidd, Brian Shaw, Doc Rivers. Did I count wrong? 6 coaches. Larry Drew, Monty Williams, Jock Vaughn, Dwayne Casey. Right? Out of 30 possible jobs, only 6 of them are held by black coaches.
Yeah.
And when you look at the fact that all of those guys, aside from Dwayne Casey, have experience as NBA point guards. Right? So you're telling me that the only way that you can get a head coaching job as a black person in the NBA is if you're a former point guard in the league. So that says a lot to me.
Hello, Derek Fisher.
Yeah, Derek Fisher's name's getting shot out there now. Or maybe not necessarily point guards, but at least as a guard. As a former guard in the league, and you think about other former black coaches, guys like Lionel Hollins or Byron Scott. Well, these guys are all guards, right?
I don't remember Monty Williams as being a guard.
Monty Williams was a guard in this league for like 9 seasons.
Okay. I remember.
And then you look at all of the coaching hires recently of guys that don't have NBA experience. Guys like Brad Stevens, Steve Clifford, Tom Thibodeau, Stan Van Gundy, Dave Yeager, Brett Brown. All these guys that don't have NBA experience, guess what? They're all white, other than Dwayne Casey.
Spoelstra.
Oh, okay, excuse me, Eric Spoelstra.
Yeah, they don't have NBA playing experience.
They don't have NBA playing experience. None of those guys.
Right.
But with the exceptions of Spoelstra and Casey, they're all white. So yeah, I definitely think that there is a lens that owners and general managers use to evaluate who is going to make a good coach in this league. And generally, it's, did you play in the league? That's one thing. Did you play guard in the league? And are you white? I definitely think all those factors play into who gets a head coaching position in this league.
Joe Lacobe's quote, I knew Steve Kerr through playing golf, says a lot. And there's actually, you mentioned...
Oh, did he say that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, we knew.
Wow.
I got to...
That speaks volumes.
Yeah, you mentioned the Scott Ulster San Francisco Gate article. There's another more in-depth article about this written by Marcus Thompson for the Mercury News, where he goes even more in depth than that Scott Ulster article, and it's too long. It's too long to sum up with the amount of time that it has. But I do suggest that everybody read it. It's really good.
So definitely link to that article, Scott Ulster's article, and then Tom Ziller also wrote a great article. We'll link to all of those in the post for this episode. Be sure to check that out afterwards. But all of those go into depth about this situation here.
There's a lot to being said about running in this when you're a billionaire owner and you only run in certain circles. Not that it's intentionally done, but but the quote from Lacobe was not a good look.
So the NFL has a policy that any time a head coaching position is available, that the team is required to interview at least one black person. Maybe not specifically black person, but I think at least one minority person for that job. The NBA doesn't. Excuse me. The NBA doesn't have a policy like that in place, to my knowledge. But with this evidence, I think it's time that they institute a policy, something similar that gives everybody an equal opportunity to get the jobs. Because we've talked about this, the coaching carousel is very small. There's a limited number of guys that can get considered for coaching jobs when they open up. And it's always the same guys, right? Mark Jackson, actually, I'm really surprised that he did this, is a guy that could have gotten into the coaching carousel, right? There are other positions available, the Lakers job, the Knicks job still available, that he could have stayed in that discussion had he, and he probably still is, but he just signed a multi-year deal to go back to ESPN. So that kind of takes him out of that loop for the next couple of seasons. But, it's the same guys. Pretty much every time there's an availability, the same guys get talked about. Byron Scott's getting talked about again. Kurt Rambis is getting talked about again. Only recently have we seen, I think, the NBA kind of change its hiring pattern and going and hiring guys like Mike Budenholzer, or hiring a guy like Brett Brown and Frank Vogel, guys who don't have NBA playing experience, but have worked up their way up through the ranks, right? But it seems like that avenue, so far anyway, is only available
for the most part, yeah. With those
to white guys, yeah, right? It's not as available to minorities.
With the exception of Spoelstra and Dwayne Casey.
With the exception of Spoelstra and Casey.
Who Dwayne Casey, we should say, just got extended.
Oh, he's done a really good job over there. So I mean, it would have been a shock if he didn't. But yeah, it's certainly something. I said the NFL
would
recognize this issue a while ago, and they put a policy in place to address it. The NBA now, the fact that they recognize just how bad the institutional racism could be with an owner like Donald Sterling, now needs to take a look at itself again and say, okay, what other ways are we possibly being, not directly or overtly, but just inherently racist, right? And the coaching hiring policy is something that should be considered here.
Yeah, and I don't think his name has come up in this discussion, but would you look at the coaching situation in Washington? Nobody thought that Randy Whitman. No one's ever said Randy Whitman's the best coach there is. And they've been a lousy team for the last 4 seasons until there's been a ton of chaos going on. Would he have gotten the same leeway if his name was Mo Cheeks? Missing the playoffs so many times and then and whatnot. Like, yeah, but like Washington's a unique situation. They had a ton of what's going on.
And they had an ownership change there. I think I don't know how long has Whitman been the coach in Washington.
I think for 4 years.
Yeah, they had an ownership change because their owner passed away and then transferred.
Yeah, like they're a unique situation. I think that but while we're on the subject, I thought it was worth mentioning. I think Ernie, like we talked about the coaching carousel in general. Like, you only have 3 years. I think Ernie Grunfeld, their general manager, did the right thing in keeping, even though he doesn't necessarily rank high on the coaching totem pole. At least they kept him there for stability, as opposed to like what Detroit has done recently. They had what they were doing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the Detroit thing. I mean, they kind of prove and disprove this theory altogether. They don't. Right. I mean, they give Mo Cheeks a fair shake, but they didn't give Lawrence Frank a fair shake either. And it seemed like every 1 or 2 seasons they got to do over there. But that goes to speaks more to the ineptitude of their front office than anything. And now they've got a new front office in place with George Karl. So I doubt that they'll have the same amount of turnover at the coaching position that they had in the past.
No, I don't. I
It's
don't
one of those things.
think
Like I said,
so.
Randy Whitman was given a chance, but Mike Woodson was also given a chance when he was coaching over there in Atlanta. But that's because they had all kinds of ownership things going on too. And during that whole process, despite the fact that the Hawks either missed the playoffs or kept getting thumped in the first round, he still
They
held on to that job.
no, they
Another thing, like Mike Brown, the fact that Mike Brown keeps getting coaching gigs, that's what I think he's the exception that disproves the rule here, or that proves the rule here, because I can't, for the life of me, understand how Mike Brown keeps getting coaching jobs. Just got fired, but guess what? I bet you within the next 1 or 2 seasons, he's going to be a head coach in the league again. The most inept dude coaching, yet he still keeps getting head coaching jobs.
and he keeps on getting paid. I ain't mad at him.
Yeah.
I ain't mad at him.
I think it's time for performances and embarrassments of the week.
I think it's time to.
And let's do these quick. Let's start with embarrassments of the week. Lamont, who's your embarrassment of the week?
There was a guy in the Staples Center crowd on Thursday who threw a beer at a referee. He had good aim because he hit whichever referee that did it, but that's just classless.
That's very classless.
That's very
He's
classless.
lucky that guy wasn't running our test.
He is he's very lucky. And also anybody who thinks that NBA games are fixed. We don't have enough time to go into why, but if you think NBA games are fixed, you're probably dumb and should stop watching NBA games.
My embarrassment of the week goes to Christopher Emmanuel Paul. I'm sorry.
You looked up his middle. Holy shit! You looked up his middle name.
I didn't look it up. I read it somewhere. Well,
Okay.
but the fact that in that Game 5 that the Clippers had that huge meltdown, a lot of it fell on Chris Paul. And in the last 5 minutes of that game, he had an offensive foul. It's essentially a turnover. Missed 2 shots. Had 2 additional turnovers. And then, of course, the foul on Russell Westbrook that allowed the Thunder to take the lead at the end of that game. Just complete meltdown. One of the worst stretches of basketball that we've ever seen from Chris Paul. I think in the entire series, he only had 6 turnovers prior to that game. And then in that game, the second half of that game, he had 5 turnovers, including 3 that I just mentioned. So just a horrible, horrible Game 5 for Chris Paul. I'm sorry. I got to give him my embarrassment of the week. Performance of the week, Lamont.
I'm going to go with a combination of Steve Adams and Nick Collison, who might actually be clones of each other somehow, some way. So in the first half of Game 6, Kendrick Perkins and Serge Ibaka got into some foul trouble, and they played Steve Adams a lot more than they ever usually do. And he responded by putting up 10 points and 11 rebounds, and really was just everywhere in that first half. Nick Collison received a DNP in that first half, but came in the second half and was just huge in ways that most of us don't even know. Of course, he had that 3
At the end of the third quarter to tie the game.
At the end of the short shot, but he's a really interesting case to look at because I think that he contributes in way. He's a player that makes impacts in ways that the untrained eye will never see. That a half-trained eye like such as myself will pick up, will usually miss, and even a trained eye like Huey Brown is going to miss some of the time. So he's a really interesting case study, I think, for somebody a lot smarter than me. But those two, my performance of the Bears. My performance of the week.
My performance of the week, and I'm going to have to pull a switcheroo here because I completely neglected the fact that LeBron James went off for 49 points in Game 4 of that series. So he's my performance of the week. Anytime a guy can score nearly 50 points in the playoffs and his team wins, that's going to be the performance of the week. There it is. LeBron James.
There it is.
Well, thank you for listening to the two of us ramble on about everything and anything in this past episode of the People's Court. We talked about the conference finals, gave our predictions and our X factors for each series, talked about Chris Paul and whether or not he's as good as people think he is, and of course whether or not the Clippers had a disappointing or successful season, and then went in deep on race and coaching in the NBA. Our next episode will be Saturday, May 24th at 11:30 a.m. But make sure you look out for our blog. As we mentioned before, we're going to post up the episode, and when we do that, we'll link to 3 very good articles that talk about race and the race issue in regards to coaching in the NBA. So be on the lookout for that. Lamont, anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
I'm coming over to use your pool. Anybody's pool. If you have a pool, you might see me using it. If you have a pool, you have a pool and you live in the LA area, you might see me using it next week.
So be on the lookout for Lamont doing what would you call that?
A swimming pool tour.
Swimming pool tour. Is that kind of like when you do the yoinks off of people's plates? You're going to yoink their pool?
So you yoink their pool and get arrested for trespassing.
There it is. Hopefully I don't have to bail you out this weekend. Episode 159 of the People's Court was brought to you by absolutely nobody. Nobody in the history of the league has ever worn number 59. Thank you for joining us. Court is adjourned.